All right, so as you can tell, I'm recording from my house. Um, Chapter 3, Prokaryotic Form and Function. Uh, I'm trying the embedded thing with me in the corner, but the PowerPoint as the main screen. Uh, I hope this works a little bit better than me in front of it or um, just the PowerPoint by itself. Uh, Let me know what you think. All right, so when we were talking in chapter 1 about the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, we talked about the fact that prokaryotes are the simpler cells. Um, they're basically a sack with everything shoved in it. Nothing has a wall around it. So, how are prokaryotes different from eukaryotes? Well, for one, it's how their DNA is packaged. In eukaryotes, you have literally a room, the nucleus, where the eukaryote's DNA is isolated. Nobody else has access. It's in this kind of sealed place. As well as that, because in eukaryotes you can have so much DNA, there has to be organization. I always talk about going to the store and getting thread. You get thread on a spool. It's not like you get thread and it's, just a bunch of thread in a bundle. With eukaryotes, their genetics is a lot more widespread. That isn't the right word. Well, it's just a lot more. So you kind of have to organize it and spool it so that it doesn't tangle. So not only do prokaryotes not have a nucleus, but there's also not that histone spooling that you see in eukaryotes. Um, their cell wall, if they have one, is also very different. So prokaryotes tend to have cell walls that are very, very different from cell membranes. With prokaryotes, the cell walls, are made up of a chemical called peptidoglycan, um, which you can see right there, peptidoglycan, and some other unique chemicals that you do not see in eukaryotes that actually have cell walls. Not every eukaryote does. We don't, for sure. Um, the internal structure is also very different. Kind of like with the nucleus actually has that kind of barrier, that cover to it. With a eukaryote, you also have individual organelles. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that, organs. I'll put it that way. Organelles are basically small structures within the cell that have very specific functions. Prokaryotes don't have that. Prokaryotes, like I said, it's almost like a Ziploc bag with everything thrown in it, and there is no separation between any of it. It's all just kind of floating in the same goo. So, the parts of a prokaryotic cell. Now, remember, this is going to be for us primarily with bacteria. And there are parts that you will find in every bacteria on the planet. There are parts that you will find in most bacteria on the planet. And then there are some things that are only found in kind of select bacteria. So, in all bacteria, we have a cell membrane, we have cytoplasm, which is the gooey mixture inside the cell. We have ribosomes. Ribosomes are very necessary because they're the things that actually help us to make proteins. We have a cytoskeleton. Just like your skeleton helps to keep your body in the right shape, inside of a cell, which by the way, cyto, that prefix right there means cell, so cyto equals the word cell. Um, you have structures inside that help that cell to maintain its shape. Now, admitted, it's not as hard as our bone. It's not made out of calcium phosphate or anything like that, but it does help it to maintain a shape, um, even if it's not as rigid as our internal skeleton. And finally, because it is a living thing, it has to have some type of genetic code. It has one or a few chromosomes. Now, keep in mind that this is in all bacteria. You will have a cell membrane, you will have cytoplasm, you will have ribosomes, you will have a cytoskeleton, and you will have a chromosome, genetic material. Now, in most bacteria, okay, so moving on to the next thing, in most bacteria, there is, most cells will have a cell wall, which we mentioned in the previous slide, made out of something called peptidoglycan. A cell wall is a lot more rigid than a cell membrane. It gives it a bit more stability. It would be like comparing, and I know this is going to sound really weird, but let's say the Three Little Piggies. You have a straw house. A straw house is a lot more malleable, a lot easier to kind of tear down than a brick wall. So the straw would be like the cell membrane. It's malleable, you can move it. But a cell wall is more like bricks, okay? You also, in most, have a surface coating called a glycocalyx or a capsule. So you've got this cell wall, and normally outside of that, you have this glycocalyx. A glycocalyx is a combination of lipids and of carbohydrates. So we'll talk about that in greater detail in a bit. So again, this is most bacteria. Not all, but most. Now, only found in some bacteria. We have things like flagella, pili, and fimbriae. So these are all things that will be sticking out of a cell. Flagella, you're probably most familiar with it if you've ever seen a drawing of a sperm or a film of a sperm where it's swimming and it's got that tail that kind of works as a propeller in the back to get it to go forward. That is going to be what a flagella is. We'll talk about pili and fimbriae when we get there because they're a little bit more specialized than just a propeller. They may have an extra outer membrane. Again, this is only in some bacteria, not in all. They can also have plasmids. Plasmids are going to be extra bits of DNA that have been picked up along the way that they have that are different than their original chromosomes. Okay? This is one of the ways that we pick up antibiotic resistance through plasmids, so these little pieces of DNA that we pick up and we put inside of our cell and we carry. Inclusions, we'll talk about in just a bit, and the ability to make endospores. Endospores make our life very difficult because endospores are a way for bacteria to kind of hibernate and create a hard shell around themselves when conditions that they are in are not favorable to themselves. So if you have a bacteria that's, let's say, out in the desert and there's no moisture and everything else, they can create this hard shell that protects them until the environment becomes favorable again. Okay, so parts of the prokaryotic cell. This is actually a figure in your book that is really nice. You can go and you can look at kind of the summary of the parts and pieces, and you can see in one page or on one page what everything is, what it looks like, and kind of what it does. So you do need to know each of the prokaryotic structures that are listed in this figure, what their functions are, and their relative locations inside the cell. Now, I'm not saying it's in the northeast corner, no. But is it on the outside? Is it on the inside? Is it the outermost thing? Is it the innermost thing? That type of location. So make sure that you check out this figure on page 62. So let's talk morphology. Morph is shape. Ology is the study of. So we're going to look at the shapes of these bacteria. Now, something you have to understand, this is just in biology in general. If you can learn prefixes and suffixes, prefixes and suffixes, you can learn the meaning of a word without having to know the meaning of the word. So I know that morph is shape. You can put it in another word, and if I see it, I know that that part of that word means shape. That's what's included as part of the word. Ology is a study of. So without having to look it up, without having to go to a dictionary, I know morphology is the study of shape. Okay? So if you can, I guess, figure that out and know that, that'll actually help you in all of your biology classes, including nursing school, dental hygiene, um, rad tech, sorry. But all of those meanings and all of those roots of words, the prefixes and the suffixes, the meaning never changes. How we put them together might change, but the meaning of them never changes, which means that if you ever see morph in another word, it also means shape, and it can help you. Okay, let me see if I can move this. Yay, I can. All right, so let me erase that. Prokaryotes tend to have very characteristic morphologies, and they're kind of limited in what they can look like. So the first one is going to be coccus. Coccus tend to look like grapes. They tend to look like circles, okay? They're spherical or ball shaped, and they can be in bundles, they can be in pairs, they can be individual, but the point is that if you see anything streptococcus, staphylococcus, you know that they are going to be circular in shape just based on the name. Now, the second shape that we tend to see is bacillus. Bacillus are rod shaped or hot dog shaped. On a slide in a microscope, they tend to look rectangular because you're taking a hot dog and you're basically squishing it to look two-dimensional. So it'll look like a rectangle. They can be very blocky. They can look like this, or they may have kind of a rounded shape to them. Like I said, like a hot dog. Okay? So it just kind of depends. But with bacilli, this is an electron micrograph of bacilli and an electron micrograph of cocci. That's why it looks circular. You can have these longer shapes. So here with coccyx, you kind of have these circles, but here you've got this longer than it is wide morphology to it. Now there is kind of an in-between called coccobacillus, and these are almost like Vienna sausages. They're shorter, but they're still more rectangular than they are circular. They're blunt, I guess, sausages. So they're short, plump bacillus. Okay. So we have coccyx, we have bacillus, we have coccobacillus. We also have spiral shapes. Okay. So spiral shapes kind of look like a spring. You've got 3 different types, and how they how do I put it? How much of a spring they are and how flexible they are kind of plays a role in where you put them in each category. So, Vibrio is a curved rod. So, unlike Bacillus, that is just a rod shape, now you have something that kind of looks like that. So, it's not necessarily a complete a complete spiral. But unlike a bacilli that is just straight, you have curve to this. To me, Vibrio in here kind of looks like Cheetos Puffs. So you've got that curve to it that wasn't there when we were talking about bacillus. Now, spirillum. Spirillum are a spiral shape, and you can see them right here, okay? But they are rigid. They don't bend around like a slinky. They're a shape and that's it. They don't necessarily have any flexibility to them. Whereas if you are a spirochete, you are that excuse me, spiral shape, but you're also fairly flexible like a slinky. So if you look here at the spirochete, you'll notice that it actually does curve around. Okay, you can see that one right there kind of doing a curve thing. So I can take a slinky and manipulate its shape, and it actually does curve like that. Now, the last type that we have is what we call branching filaments. So you've got kind of a rod shape, okay? But then you've got these branches coming off of it, almost like a tree, okay? So it isn't necessarily a simple shape of a sphere or a rod or a spiral. Now you've got this branching to it that you didn't see before. All right. So, prokaryotic cell arrangement. This is also one of those things that with bacteria we look at because things tend to have the same type of arrangement. I mentioned this in the last slide when I said you can find them kind of in a bundle, you can find them in pairs. This type of thing actually does play into how we name things. So for cocci, we can have Diplococcus, okay? Di means pairs. Sorry. So if you look down here, this would be Diplococcus. It's got two of them put together, two grapes kind of glued together. You can have tetrads. Tetrads are going to be groups of 4. So if you look here, that's a tetrad. Okay, so tetrad, dyad, or Diplococcus. You can also have cubidopackets between 8 and 64. So this would be a cube. So that's 8. You can also have bigger packets. Well, hang on. Bigger packets that you can see like down there, where you've got quite a few all together in this cube shape. You can have clusters. So when we say staph, like staphylococci, we mean that there are clusters, there are bundles of them. Okay, so you can see these bundles down here. We can also have chains. So chains like this, almost like a pearl necklace, you would call them strep. So strep throat. The thing that is infecting your throat has this linear kind of beaded necklace appearance. So when you hear about somebody having a staph infection, that means that the bacteria that are infecting them have this clustered arrangement to them. Okay? So that's for cocci. Okay? Now let's talk about bacilli arrangements. Bacilli arrangements, some of them are very similar. So you can have the diplobacilli. So again, they come in pairs. Okay, so you've got 2 hot dogs right next to each other. They can also come in chains. So you remember this is strep, this is strep. So you can have long chains of hot dogs put together. Okay. The last one is unique to bacilli, and we call that the palisades. Okay. These are rows that are oriented side by side. So if you look at the picture, I have several different rows of bacillus, but they're literally side by side. They're right next to each other. So that isn't a chain of them like a necklace with really, elongated beads. And it isn't in pairs. This is kind of a cluster, almost like you have trains right next to each other. So that would be the palisades. Okay, I need to get water, so